Familiar Warriors. They have never been popular among Norscan players, especially now that Skinwolves got their regeneration trait buffed. However, Mr. Teufel has figured out a really interesting application for these guys. Their armor sundering trait actually synergizes really well with certain Norscan characters. The Shaman-Sorcerer bring in the Plague of Rust that can debuff armor by 60 at most. And then Wolfric the Wanderer, his Hunter of Champions, can further debuff enemy characters' armor by another 30. That is a maximum of minus 120 armor on enemy characters, significantly boosting the non-armor piercing damage on any Norscan units. Just like Wolfric the Wanderer here, he is on foot, so that maximizes the damage boost from the Sword of Torgold, and the lack of armor piercing isn't a problem, as his target will no longer have any armor after all those debuffs. Non-armor piercing units like Marauder Champions and the Feral Manticore, they can also receive some damage boost from all those armor reduction. Now for the rest of the army build here, we have some Marauders with great weapons on the flanks and a couple Marauder Hunters with throwing axes. There are in total 3 Familiar Warriors, so that is just a lot of monster hitting power for the Norscan army. For the rest of the character toolkit, a Searing Doom, a Scroll of Power for cooldown reduction, and a Scroll of Shielding. And Wolfric the Wanderer bring in Fight or Die and the Sea Fang Bolt as well. Now for their opponent here, a heavily armored faction, the Dawi, a front line of miners with blasting charges backed up by a single Dwarf Warriors and a couple Thunders, and then there's a single entity core here with Grombrindle, the White Dwarf, and Felix, as well as a single Rune Smith. Further back, some Slayers to protect the backline, one of them the Dragon Black Slayers, and on the flanks we have some Dwarf Warriors for some harder defense units. A single Skyhammer is hovering over the battlefield ready to shoot down its foes with those armor-piercing fire and cluster bombs. And that's it for the army builds. Now let's get the battle started and see how Mr. Teufel can use this armor debuff combo. With Norscan's lack of anti-air, the Skyhammer was able to push ahead of its formation and will soon be peppering down the Norscan units. Now at the back, the Marauder Hunters, they don't have enough range to really screen away the Skyhammer. Only really the Feral Manticore has a bit of threat. But then the Skyhammer can simply pull back while the Thunders push up and start aiming at the Feral Manticore. And the Feral Manticore cannot just keep chasing after the Gyro Bomber. So as a result, the Skyhammer is able to shoot at the Familiar Warriors, suppressing their advancing speed. Though the Familiar Warriors do have really impressive armor and on top of that 20% missile resistance, and they won't be taking that much damage from the Dawi missiles. Now the frontline miners with blasting charges chucking their explosives into the Marauders, doing some pretty good damage against the Marauder Champions, but then they will be plowed by a whole lot of Familiar Warriors, especially with their armor sundering hitting those miners, lowering their armor down to 50. This allows the Marauder Champions with impressive weapon strength, not the greatest armor piercing, but 50 weapon strength to start dishing out some massive pain against the miners. The Slayers are forced to move in. On the left flank, the Feral Manticore is opening some Dwarf tin cans, munching on their meat. Some great weapon Marauders are also helping out. Now in the middle, Grombrindle has engaged in melee, dropping in that flash bomb, lowering the melee defenses of all surrounding troops. But this is not a great issue for the Norscans, as they are heavily armored on this part of the front line. Instead, the Dwarf Warriors are in great trouble as a combination of armor sundering plus Plague of Rust lowers their armor down to 0. And now the Marauder Champions can do some massive damage against the Dwarf Warriors, who relies heavily on that armor for protection, though they're also trying to advance through and push into the Thunder, so they're not actually focusing down the Dwarf Warriors, but still, damage is damage, and this is indeed very nice damage boost. Now on the flank here, Slayers are still trying to tie down the Familiar Warriors, but unfortunately they don't have the greatest armor piercing and are doing very limited damage to the Familiar Warriors. On the other flank, things are looking slightly better for the Dawi, with the Skyhammer coming in for a cluster bombing run. Each bomb drop has 4 times the projectiles and 4 times the damage. Plus the explosions have pretty decent armor piercing value as well. Unfortunately, Dragonback Slayers being butt naked and doesn't have the greatest armor piercing will not trade cost efficiently into the Marauder Champions and Familiar Warriors. Now the Skyhammer has taken some noticeable damage after being targeted by armor piercing throwing axes. The Thunders are now being chased down by some Marauder Champions. These guys are also being routed by a combination of Marauders with great weapons, Familiar Warriors, and Champions. The Slayers, the last of them, are still standing, while the characters here are now being hit by a lot of debuffs. Armor debuffs from the Hunter of Champions, Plague of Rust, plus a sundered armor from the Familiar Warriors. Well, yeah, 0 armor on the Runesmith. This means now he is taking full damage from Wolfric the Wanderer, who has 778 weapon strength, buffed up by Sword of Torgold. He's also taking every single hit coming his way, with his 0 defense right now, all thanks to Hunter of Champions minus 40 melee defense debuff. This forces a response from Grombrindle and Felix. There's enough armor-piercing damage from the characters here with Grombrindle's Great Axe and also the anti-infantry plus armor-piercing from Felix. So Wolfric will be backing off through his own men, using his underlings to screen away those armor-piercing dwarf single entities. The Runesmith, now being surrounded by armor-piercing Great Axes and also Familiar Warriors, will not be enjoying this fight and will be slowly chipped down. In the skies, the Skyhammer has expanded almost all its ammo. It has been targeting the Familiar Warriors the whole time, but unfortunately that missile resistance mitigated a lot of its damage. The Dwarf Warriors, despite outnumbered, are still fighting valiantly, but once the champions surround them, they will be quickly hacked down. While the Marauder Hunters are approaching towards the front line, aiming their axes at the Skyhammer. But rather unfortunate for them, the Skyhammer automatically dives down after running out of ammo and actually dodges most of the shots. And now the game has devolved into a battle of buffs and debuffs. Felix receiving a bunch of buffs including Master Rune of Negation plus 40% damage resistance, Foe Seeker for that Vigor Refresh, and Karagol, buffing melee attack bonus versus infantry and imbuing flaming attacks. Grombrindle also not taking much damage, all thanks to Helping Hand from Felix adding 40 melee attack and 40% damage resistance. But Felix is indeed debuffed in terms of armor, and now Wolfric the Wanderer is psycho charging him, being whacked in the back by Marauders with great weapons and Familiar Warriors as well, and then a Plague of Rust will be lowering his armor all the way down to 10 only. And once the Master Rune of Negation wears off, there will be a damage spike, combining with Hunter of Champions, absolute 0 armor right now. And then there's also the melee defense debuff down to only 15 melee defense. He'll be taking consistent hits. The Skyhammer, despite running low on HP, tries its best to psycho charge. But even with Grombrindle's flash bomb, the Skyhammer simply can't do the damage. At the same time, we can see that Felix's healing is not keeping up with Wolfric's attack. His reduced melee defense and armor really hurting him here, now being surrounded by Norscan units. Right now we'll be doing a bit of fast forward as Felix is breaking away from the blob fight. The Norscans have total control in terms of mobility and they will be able to chase him down, preventing him from returning. This leaves the Dawi with one and only one combatant on the field. Grombrindle, surrounded by Norscan troops, he is unbreakable indeed and will be fighting to death. And with all these Norscan units surrounding him, there is no good firing arc for the Marauder Hunters. And being a Dawi Footlord, this legendary White Dwarf actually has enough mass to push through the Norscan infantry. Of course, he is still susceptible to any debuffs. Once again, the Norscan armor debuff combo strikes Grombrindle. Hunter of Champions, Armor Sundering plus Plague of Rust upgraded version lowers his armor down to single digit. He is taking massive damage from all the Norscan units, including Wolfric, who is buffed by Sword of Torgold. But he is fighting valiantly, putting in some big hits on Wolfric the Wanderer, actually routs him from combat. Seeing this, Wolfric will be seizing the opportunity, chasing after Wolfric, finishing him off with an axe to his back. Though the killing blow might be dealt by one of the throwing axes from Wolfric's own men, perhaps a friendly fire accident, which can be quite common in factions with a lot of infighting. Anyway, seeing Grombrindle is so low in health and soon to be swarmed by Norscan units, the dwarf player will be forfeiting the game before it drags on. Now this combo is extremely lethal to large armored single entities due to their large hitbox allowing easier hits from missiles and more units to surround and attack them at the same time. They rely heavily on armor to protect themselves. But just like Skarbrand, once hit by all those armor debuffs, stripping all the way down to 0 armor, and at the same time, Wolfric the Wanderer being buffed up by Sword of Torgold and the Lore of Metal passive, having over 800 weapon strength. Skarbrand's HP gone from over 5,000 down to absolute 0 in the matter of seconds. Of course, this is not only Wolfric's doing, but also with the help of a lot of javelin fire from all those Marauder horsemen. They have good missile strength but not a lot of armor piercing, so the armor debuff does help them a lot, which leads me to my next point. Now, armor debuff is one of the more versatile debuffs that an army can get, simply because every single army has an abundance of units that deals non-armor piercing damage, and for the Norscans, they are no exception. With the Marauder champions, we've definitely talked about them before, and also Wolfric the Wanderer as well. And now we are going to cover the other ones. Marauder Berserkers, impressive weapon strength plus bonus versus infantry at 52 weapon strength. Great melee attack stats, but the thing is they can't do a lot of damage to armored targets, and the Armor Sundering plus Plague of Rust would be helping them a whole lot. Same goes for the Marauder Hunters with Javelins, but really this includes all Javelins, including the Marauder Horsemen and Horse Masters. Stripping away the armor means that the high missile strength of Javelins can do maximum damage, especially with the Marauder Hunters, who does have anti-large, and don't forget the Norscan Doggos, their Warhounds, and Norscan Ice Wolves. Especially now that we are in the big doggo meta, where the Ice Wolves being one of the stronger Norscan units, having Frostbite and great non-armor piercing weapon strength. They are already good at countering enemy light mobility, and with all those armor debuffs, they can even go toe-to-toe against heavy cavalry. One possible use of the Ice Wolves is using their Frostbite to slow down enemy cavalry, while the slower, heavier Familiar Warriors will catch up and apply that armor sundering, which in turn buffs up the damage output of the Norscan Ice Wolves. The Norscans also have some non-armor piercing monsters, their Skin Wolves and the Feral Manticore. The problem is Familiar Warriors are quite expensive themselves, which means after spending money on them, there's not a lot of leftover funds for even more monsters, so it is not likely to see a combo of Skin Wolves and Familiar Warriors, but it might still be an interesting combo to experiment with. Now, the combo is not only effective against enemy characters and infantry units, but also against cavalry. For example, these Orc Boy Biggins being pinned down by the monstrous infantry Familiar Warriors. They're taking damage from the armor piercing of the monsters and also the focused fire from all the Marauder Horsemen's javelins, as their armor is now down to 0 thanks to all the armor debuffs. Do note that you need the Familiar Warriors to actually debuff any units that are not characters, as the Hunter of Champions on Wolfric only applies to characters. This forces you to invest more resources to kill things. For example, you need to overcast a Plague of Rust to get that 60 armor debuff instead of stacking Sundering armor plus a regular cast Plague of Rust. Now let's talk about the weakness of this build. Familiar Warriors having heavy armor and missile resistance are more resilient to damage than Skin Wolves, but unfortunately they are less durable. For example, over here, despite the armor debuff, Strike Force managed to kill off the Golden Griffin. They also took a lot of damage from the Tzeentch army ability, the Bombardment. Now the Regiment of Renowned Miststalkers still have a bit of fighting power, having 15 models left. If these were Skin Wolves, it would have been fine, as they can slowly regenerate their HP. The longer the battle drags on, the more they can heal back. But these are unfortunately Familiar Warriors, and they do not have any healing whatsoever, and that means they'll have to fight with whatever meager HP they have left. This means that when you're playing with the Familiar Warriors, your margin for mistakes is much smaller, because any damage they take cannot be recovered. Now let us conclude this video in the post-battle screen. Mr. Teufel here coming up with a quite creative build here, using these Familiar Warriors despite their niche applications, synergizing the armor sundering with other armor debuffs, including Wolfric the Wanderers, Hunter of Champions, and the Plague of Rust from the Metal Shaman-Sorcerer. And in the end, this allows the other non-armor piercing units like the Marauder Champions and the Feral Manticore, as well as Wolfric the Wanderer himself, doing some massive damage throughout the battle. As you can see here, Wolfric getting over 2,500 gold worth of damage value, cutting down multiple characters of the Dawi, and also the Marauder Champions punching through the Dawi front line, still having quite a bit health left, despite fighting through the entire game. The Feral Manticore not getting a lot of damage, while the Marauder Hunters, they were just basically shooting at the Sky Hammer and also some of the armored units of the Dawi, getting some nice damage on this one, the other not so much. The Marauder Hunters, their armor piercing fire are very effective against the heavily armored dwarfs, especially shooting at the expensive Sky Hammer. They earn back quite a bit of value. While the Marauders with great weapons, these guys 2,100 gold worth of damage value, possibly surrounding Grombrindle and other dwarf characters, and just deal some very cost-effective damage with their armor piercing perhaps. Especially when buffed up by Fight or Die from Wolfric the Wanderer, they do have a lot more hit chance, all thanks to the melee attack buff. The other Marauders with great weapons also earned back their own value, while the Familiar Warriors did some solid damage overall due to their armor piercing and armor sundering. For the Dawi, The Skyhammer did some pretty nasty damage with the cluster bombs, able to expand all its ammo from its armor-piercing gun. Got some nice work done, just not quite enough to recover their value. Thunders got shut down hard after the front line of the dwarves crumbled under the might of the Familiar Warriors plus Marauder Champions combo. Their main protection, their heavy armor, is stripped away by all those armor sundering and armor debuffs, and then their melee defense is overcome by the sheer melee stats on all these Marauder Champions, plus a fight or die buff from Wolfric the Wanderer, buffing up their melee attack. Miners with blasting charges, they didn't do much damage due to all the armor on the field. Same goes for the Slayers due to the Norskins' heavy armor. Their lack of armor piercing was not able to do much damage, almost earning back their own value, but that is at a cost of fighting to the last dwarf. For the characters, Felix did some solid damage. He did receive a bunch of buffs throughout the battle, so this is not too surprising. Runesmith not doing much damage, while Grombrindle getting over 2000 gold worth of damage value. Very solid stuff here, as he is indeed a powerful melee combatant. And that's it for today's video. Massive thanks to Mr. Teufel for coming up with this really fun army build and sending in so many replays. All the replays I've showcased so far are actually played by him. Haven't been doing wild army builds on the channel for quite a while, and really happy to see niche units and wild army ideas in action. And I had a lot of fun making this video and watching the replays. I hope viewers you enjoy these replays as much as I do, and if you do and want to see more, be sure to subscribe to the channel and keep an eye out for new videos. That's it for today, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Tactical Lich, signing out.